All right, all right, all right. Welcome in. This is Toilets to Titles. This is episode number 118. If you've been keeping track at home, tonight we got some NFL draft skill player discussion with the man himself, Matt Waldman. With me this evening, my co-host, my guy, Frito Bandito, Rich at Frito Bandito _FF, and again the guest at Matt Waldman on the Twitter, the creator of the rookie scouting portfolio, Matt Waldman, RSP.com. Matt, how we doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Love the show entrance artwork there, though. I wondered who the Jon Snow looking guy was with the headband.
Yeah, that's we got that. So we have a man, we've been we have steps in our growth as a show, and one of the steps was somebody did like artist renderings of all of us. And you know what, you should, we do Dungeons and Dragons once a month. And
there you go.
It's even funnier. Like, we have some funny Dungeons and Dragons images, but yeah, the artist rendering, it's like every person who's joined Toilets to Titles. Andrew Campy is our like web designer, and we've paid somebody to do those. So yes, it was pretty flattering. So
it was nice. But I was definitely waiting you to fly in on a dragon, and
yeah,
Well,
I'm past the wall now. I'm on the other side.
There you go.
After he killed the queen, right? He's been banished, to be with the wildlings. But yeah, so Matt,
could be worse. You could look like the Onion Pirate.
Ooh, don't want that. Don't want that.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. Man, that show. Man, I was hoping they do.
That's what it is.
I was hoping they do a spinoff with Arya when she went to the West, and they said the map was like no one knows what's over there, and I was like, man, this sounds exactly like a new show's coming.
Maybe she'll meet the dragon who carried off Daenerys, and then who
carried off who?
Daenerys.
Oh, Target. Yeah, well, maybe, you never know. You never know, but I know they're doing a prequel.
There you go.
So I'll take what I can get. But I love the chalkboard. When you're on, man, I love I feel like anybody tuning in at home, seeing you sitting here, you got the chalkboard behind you, you got the notes. This dude's the real deal. If you've never heard of Matt Waldman, go check out mattwaldmanrsp.com. The rookie scouting portfolio is, man, I don't really even know how to describe it in a few words. It's very in depth, very detailed. And they're like anybody who, whether you're new to this, whether you're just a draft nut, whether you're a fantasy football guy, a dynasty fantasy football guy, whatever, you can learn so much from checking that out. I can't say it enough. And I've learned a lot from you, Matt, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you this evening. I do want to let everybody know, however you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, throw us a like, put some comments in there, because we're going to be talking about a lot of draft prospects. So I'd be interested to hear about who you're interested in. All right. And if you're on Apple Podcast, if you could throw us a 5-star review, again, that would be greatly appreciated. And we are on toiletstotitles.com. I reference Andrew Campy, our web designer. He'd be greatly appreciated if you went over there, toiletstotitles.com, checked out our articles, and you could find all of our shows on there. We have tons of shows. So Matt, before we get into this year's class specifics, right? Why don't you recap, last year? Can you talk about some of your hits and misses from this last class, and maybe some guys you're looking at, going into year 2 that you think could ascend?
Yeah, sure. Obviously Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle were two of the best receivers I've scouted in a very long time. And Chase had the highest grade I think I've given in a while, if not one of the highest ever. He worked out pretty well. Certainly a guy, Waddle worked out well, even though they asked him to do kind of a Jarvis Landry impersonation, as opposed to being the Santana Moss-like figure that he could be, if we go back that far in the day. Khalil Herbert is an example of a lesser guy that I liked a lot and rated as a sleeper. He saved a lot of fantasy seasons mid-season with the work that he was able to do.
I think I traded Rich for Khalil Herbert, I believe, in a Debbie League we're in, because I had David Montgomery, so I wanted that handcuff out of Virginia Tech. So I listened to you last year. I grabbed him.
Nice. Trey Sermon I had rated number 1 overall. I still look at that as as a, from a pre-draft perspective. It was kind of a hit and a miss in the way that it's a miss in the sense that he didn't deliver production. He didn't even get a chance to start for the 49ers. But pre-draft, I listed the 49ers as the absolute worst place for him to go. And then after the draft, seeing where they traded up, I hoped that maybe that would be different. But it turned out with the 49ers, with George Kittle, with Trent Williams, with the two receivers who can block, and with Kyle Juszczyk, their system is really the exception to the rule in terms of, let's just value speed. Let's just get a guy with speed out to the edge. So Elijah Mitchell really got, benefited from that fact that they valued a high speed guy as opposed to a nuanced player.
When I watched Mitchell on film last year, and even so now looking back at, Tyler Algier, I don't want to go too far ahead, reminds me a little bit of Elijah Mitchell, but I didn't recall Mitchell being as fast as he is. When I went back and looked at his combine numbers, didn't necessarily match up with what I thought when I watched his film. So, but he ran like 4.4.
And that's because when in most systems you don't have blocking that opens craters for you to run through without having to make anything other than a straight line decision. And the 49ers have that kind of offense where he's hit or miss. If you look at his yards per carry average, you look at the runs on a play-by-play basis, you could argue that Trey Sermon actually looked better in the limited carries that he had, having to do more with less. But again, the 49ers want speed, and West Coast offenses tend to be very systemic in terms of matching the system. They want the player to fit into the system as opposed to matching the system to the player. And so if that player doesn't fit exactly what they're looking for, they get finicky about that stuff. And I think that's, a guy like Sermon's going to have to go somewhere else, probably to get an opportunity. Other guys like quarterbacks, I was lower on Zach Wilson than most. I think that's fairly accurate. I think what we saw from Wilson was what is a slow development at best. I was higher on Davis Mills. By the end of the year, I had Davis Mills over Wilson. By the end of the year, Davis Mills earned an opportunity that we may see Houston say, you know what, we are truly going to give him a second look and let him do what he's doing. So, those are some examples. Obviously, Pat Freiermuth not being far behind, Kyle Pitts, good examples of some guys there from that perspective. So, Trey Lance thought he'd get an opportunity to start early on. And what we saw was, beneficial. We saw good work from him, and I think there's still promise there. But, the 49ers were in contention mode. And really, I don't think it was that Trey Lance was raw as much as he's inexperienced. And there's a difference because he plays in that West Coast offense at North Dakota State. But it's still, he's only faced a year and a game of college competition. So the experience factor was there. But in the second set of games he played, he was better than the first set. So I think while disappointing maybe early on, there's potential still there for him from that perspective. So those are some examples of some guys hit and miss wise.
What do you think about Terrace Marshall? I think we can expect anything from him this season.
I think if they get a quarterback, then there's potential there. He started off decently, but a lot of what Terrace Marshall's going to have to do is, if he's playing inside, which was a lot of what you're asking him to be on the same page with the quarterback to an even higher degree than you ask outside players to be. So his development path is going to be slower, especially with a struggling Sam Darnold.
Yeah. And now, they're looking supposedly at Baker Mayfield. And I don't know if that's, but you're a Browns fan. So is that an upgrade over Darnold? What do you think? You've watched Mayfield.
It's slight, but I've been way back in the day, ever since pre-draft, I noted that his accuracy, his pocket presence, were not as good as people wanted to make them out to be, and that he reminded me more of a Jeff Garcia than the Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Brett Favre combo that people were talking about pre-draft. And I said as such on Cleveland Browns radio, and I don't think I've been invited back since after his big touchdown season. And I still said, nope, that's how I feel about it. But that's a joke. I know they'd have me back on. But the point being is that, he needs a lot of help around him, and Carolina's doesn't have, if he couldn't get it done in Cleveland, on a consistent level. And I know he blames injury. I know he blames the organization, but he has to own some of this beyond all of that, because even with the data, the accuracy is different than accuracy percentage. And it's how you track that information, in terms of pinpoint and general accuracy versus different types of coverages. And sorry, but when you have wide open Odell Beckham Jr. and you completely miss him, and you miss him repeatedly, and and not just the hit clips that his dad made,
and
but
that guy's
with a lot
catch
of other
radius
receivers
is pretty impressive. So to be when he's wide open, to miss him, it's a little different than missing, general wide receivers. This guy, he can extend, and catch anything, anything he gets his hands on.
This was the same problem he had against good college teams who played man-to-man coverage and could lock down his receivers and force him not to throw against air, but actually have to throw against other bodies and read leverage quickly. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it against certain spurts against Oklahoma State. He had certain spurts against Georgia in the second half of Georgia, when Georgia just said, okay, we'll play man-to-man and we'll put NFL athletes on you and see how you do. And he imploded. And that's always been a problem with him way back, even at Texas A&M. And people saw the accuracy percentage, but they don't understand that accuracy percentage doesn't give you the context. It just gives you context of whether the ball was caught, not where the ball was placed.
All right, I want to stick with quarterbacks. So I think quarterbacks with this year's class, it started out everyone was very low on this quarterback class. I started hearing rumblings about Malik Willis towards the end of last year. And now, over the last few weeks, we did a fantasy football dynasty superflex mock like 3 weeks ago, and I was surprised. We had some people that I respect from the industry on the show, and 4 quarterbacks went in the first 12 picks. So it seems like these quarterbacks. It's either people are desperate just because there's spots that need to be filled, or it's actually, some of these guys are higher on quarterbacks than I thought they were, or that we might have thought they were at the beginning of the scouting process. So how do you see the quarterback landscape right now? Who's your guy? Who do you think is maybe the best developmental player, like a guy you could see really, developing and becoming a starter? What are your thoughts on the quarterback class?
Well, I think it's a complicated class from the standpoint that nobody really studies quarterbacks the same way, and there's often holes in everybody's evaluation process.
I don't even bother.
Yeah, It is hard. And so, the scouts I talk to, even after I've done my process, there's one quarterback that there's not one quarterback everyone dislikes and not one quarterback everyone likes a lot. The same quarterback, some people, there's one guy who says, I wouldn't draft anybody but Malik Willis. Somebody else says, I wouldn't draft anybody but Desmond Ridder. There's other people that say, forget both of them. I have reject grades on both. I would rather have a developmental guy like maybe Sam Howell, or Pickett or somebody else. It's that way across the board. And I'm talking experienced NFL scouts, guys who've been a part of organizations that built dynasties 20, 30 years ago. Okay. Those are some of the people I've talked to. And, it's no different with me. But my process has always been different. If I liked Lamar Jackson as the number 2 quarterback in that class and thought he had the best pocket presence. Patrick Mahomes was my number 1 quarterback. I loved Russell Wilson. This year, Malik Willis, don't want to touch him. But at the same time, I understand that he might be the safest fantasy play of the quarterbacks just because he can run with the football, right. And you're going to get temporary production at the very least, and you can sell him high if you want to, if you're savvy about that, or you bet on hope that he'll land in a good system that will maximize his strengths, minimize his weaknesses, and give him a chance to develop a la Josh Allen. But I don't think that he's that guy. Josh Allen was the exception to the rule because he had the right system. He had the right coach. They got him the right players. And to his credit, he developed as well. But he also showed things that I don't think Malik Willis showed on tape in terms of decision-making, how to scramble, whether there's a difference between making a throw of hubris and not seeing what you're throwing towards or not reading it effectively. And I think Malik Willis and Desmond Ridder both have that problem. And in terms of spotting danger, no danger in an anticipatory way that you need to have as a quarterback. Guys that I like, listen, I'm okay with Kenny Pickett, but I see him more on that. I see him more on that Kirk Cousins, Mason Dixon line between, is he a franchise guy or a one contract guy?
Davis Mills or Kenny Pickett?
I would say probably
coming out. So not
coming out,
not given, where what we've seen from Davis Mills with the Texans coming out. So, and I know, if Pickett was in last year's class, he wouldn't be, I don't think, considered a top guy. So, who would you have higher?
Yeah, Davis Mills. Let's see. Davis Mills. All right, that's good to know. So I had him. I think I've Pickett higher. Let's see. Let me look real quick. Yep, I've Pickett just maybe half a tier higher.
But I think that's good for people listening at home to take into consideration.
Yes. So, but yeah, because I'll put it to you this way. I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have about 5 or 6 players who I have higher than Zach Wilson last year. But again, I didn't think Zach Wilson was worth remotely a first round pick. But at the same time, I had about 5 players over Davis Mills, who I thought was worthwhile where they drafted him. So if Mills and Wilson were drafted in the same round, would have been okay with that.
Okay.
So Pickett, I like okay, but there's some issues with certain isolated types of pressures that are common to the NFL that you don't see as much in college, where he sees flashes of color and just his game completely flips out. Like he drops the ball, drops his eyes, body language completely changes, loses his position to throw the ball. Whereas a guy like Lamar Jackson, for all his running ability, is an anchor in the pocket and can have bodies pass by him like a white shark, basically grazing his skin, and him not freak out and be able to throw a ball downfield. But Pickett's not that way. He's mobile, but that's an area that Joe Montana used to say, if you freak out over flashes of color, that's a problem. And while he can handle certain pressure he expects, or it doesn't, or it looks it's covered by a blocker, he's fine. But in those instances where that happens, that's an issue. I like Matt Corral. I think Matt Corral, while not as, he doesn't have the system experience that some of these other guys have, and they talk about he throws lots of RPOs and it's a simple lane Kiffin system. The thing that people overemphasize are the stats, the intellectual tests of quarterback play in terms of rote memory and complexities of what you have to remember, and they minimize the intuitive grasp of the game. And people call it the it factor. I call it integrated technique, because if you break things down well enough and you get granular enough, you see techniques that are integrated well enough in situational football that isn't taught or practiced, because the best quarterbacks respond quickly like they're on a stage, in the same way an actor can listen to another actor and deliver with great timing as if it's believable. And it's the same thing with football players. And people,
that's great. This is great stuff.
I appreciate it. I mean, but this is what I study and how I study it.
I love it.
Because Patrick Mahomes had it, Brett Favre had it, Steve McNair had it, Dan Marino had it. I just named 4 players. 3 of them were reasons why they should have ditched the Wonderlic about 1 million years ago, because none of those guys had great Wonderlicks. They all questioned their intelligence, and they all value guys like Alex Smith, Brandon Weeden, Carson Wentz, and a bunch of other guys who basically know the math but don't know how to perform. And they look like they're doing math on the field when situations are not prepared for it, which happens all the time. And those pivotal 3 to 5 plays per game that you got to win, because the defense says, we're gonna make the math complicated for you, and you can't think your way out of this. You're gonna have to act and react to this, and your footwork's got to be so good, your ability to understand what you're seeing before it fully forms to do it. Because Alex Smith was as smart as an economist, and he played like an economist for most of his career. As admirable as he was a pretty darn good starting quarterback towards the end, but he wasn't a franchise caliber quarterback, because on third and 14, when he needed to make that throw at the end of the game, and he had the leverage to read, and the ball had to be out at the top of the break, where he saw that the receiver was tight to the man, but the leverage should have been instant to see it. He knew he had it open, but he didn't trust himself. He would have to wait, And then when he'd throw it, it'd get batted away because it was too late when he decided to wait to see it was open, like the economists do, who can't tell you when a recession is until after it's over. And I think that that's kind of the thing with a lot of these quarterbacks. Matt Corral has that skill to piece things together. It may not be high-level stuff he's doing, but the fundamentals are there. You don't have to untie things about his game. You can build on it. The two guys that I think developmentally, or the redshirt guy in this class, is Carson Strong. People want the mobile guy. That's great. They say the mobile the pocket quarterback is dying. All right. And they'll say, don't count Tom Brady. He's an anomaly because he's older and he's still playing great. But what about all the other guys that are gone? Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees. What about those guys? They're all gone, and they weren't so good lately. It's because they were pocket quarterbacks. No, it's because their arms became noodles, and they couldn't make the throws that they used to be able to make. What they did from the pocket was outstanding. And still, you look at a Russell Wilson, a Lamar Jackson, or Patrick Mahomes, and when they need to play from the pocket, they can win from the pocket. And those, you got to make the easy plays. You can't win off of 10, 12, 15 hard plays a game. You don't win that way. You win from the 25 easy plays you have, and hopefully you complete 3 to 4 of the 5 hard plays that you're forced to be into conceptually or technically. And Strong understands the offense, executes pre-snap, makes adjustments, makes reads to adjust his line, makes those calls, and played on one leg and looked better than most of these guys, if you ask me, in terms of accuracy. The arm strength, he's playing on one leg, so he had to make adjustments that he wasn't always able to hit some of the throws that he could make earlier than that. As long as the knee's okay, and as long as it's not a Jay type of injury where they say it's going to blow up, he'd be the guy I'd wait on. And I think the best quarterback in this class, which, after I say stuff that people will say, oh, that makes sense, that's a good point, whatever, and people will go, see, this is where I don't like this, is I think the best quarterback that I graded pre-draft was Skyler Thompson out of Kansas State.
I've seen some of your work on him. So go on.
Yeah.
Let us hear it.
He's a dual threat quarterback who, he plays in the North Dakota State West Coast offense that was brought over to Kansas State. If you know anything about that offense, you understand that you could say, well, Carson Wentz and Trey Lance, they weren't great right away. And they'd argue that Carson Wentz isn't that good for fantasy anymore. He just had a fluke good year or whatever, and Lance is unproven. Well, let's look at that a little bit. When you say with Wentz's appeal was because he knew the West Coast offense, but the issue with him that the Eagles found out, and Eagles writers will nod their heads, and they know this, as I've talked about this on their shows, is that year 2, by the end of year 1, they knew that Carson Wentz could not drop back well more than 3 steps, that his footwork was awful. It affected his accuracy. He was not good at moving around the pocket where he had to move efficiently, reset, and fire with a timing route. He was a scrambler backyard kind of player, in the way that Lamar Jackson gets overcharacterized, and is kind of more of a guy that when he throws deep, his accuracy is awful unless it's within basically 35 yards and under on a regular basis, and in terms of air yards. So I know that people will talk about and say, well, he's had great accuracy deep with certain, in terms of his percentages. But if you really granularly look at it, you realize that he has issues with that. And part of it was tied to that he couldn't make 5-step drops, 7-step drops. So the Eagles went to 1-step, 2-step, and 3-step looks with the RPOs and with the Baker Mayfield type of Oklahoma game that they used to have with Lincoln Riley, doing a lot of the things that you would see in offenses like that. And he thrived until defenses kind of caught on to him a little bit more, and were able to defend that enough that his performances became up and down after that. And so when you look at a guy like Skyler Thompson, the thing about that offense that's so appealing is because it's a true West Coast offense, a pro-style offense, you got to make the reads. You have to make the adjustments at the line. You have to adjust your blocking scheme, audible. You have to do all that. You have to know the verbiage. On top of that, you have to read short to deep. Nobody in the NFL reads short to deep because it's harder. And you don't need, and it means that you lose opportunities with the deep game at the NFL level. But in the college game, you can get away with doing that more often, but it is a harder thing to do. And it means that your statistics aren't probably going to be as strong most of the time if you're playing at big boy football like the Big 12 or the SEC or ACC. So his statistics from a raw box score standpoint were not strong, but the metrics that you see to judge accuracy on a more granular level were very strong. He's a great pocket player in terms of efficient movement. He's tough. He'll take a licking and not freak out over that. He has great ball placement. A lot of times he'll make throws that there's some throws on his tape that are some of the best throws you'll see from any prospect last year or this year. And he is like Justin Herbert, like layered throws between defenders. And
I'd like to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if you want to go 2 years ago or 3 years, go 3 years ago back to his game against Texas, the Texas team that took Joe Burrow's LSU national championship team to the brink. Okay. And there's a lot more plays than this, but go watch that game and watch him at the end of the game basically have a dropped pass in the end zone that was layered between defenders on a 4th down that would have won that game if his receiver who came down with the ball literally landed in his hands, in his chest, and he went down to the ground and the ball popped out. He wasn't even hit, even though he was in a tight area. Those are the types of throws he can make. I've seen a lot of those throws from him. And he's not even being considered a day 2 prospect. Is
this just by social media, or you think even by GMs and scouts out there, they're not even considering him?
Scouts that I've talked to, and I've heard from other people who know scouts, there are people, the same people who I've talked to that I mentioned earlier. Some of them have said, I really like him, but I know that he won't get justified because he doesn't have the stats. The same reason that Jim Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl, when I listened to him this summer, or I listened to him and went back to a summer interview of him because he came back from the Manning Academy, and he said, and it was told, reporters were told the guy who had the most impressive Manning Academy of the quarterbacks that was Skyler Thompson, and that he had a stronger arm than people realized, and that he was lighting it up in camp. And so local Kansas State, affiliate basically was like, interviewed Nagy and said, what it would take for him to get to the Senior Bowl. And I'm inferring what Jim Nagy said. I'm not quoting him directly, but anybody with a half a brain would know what I'm saying here is the truth. Jim Nagy basically said he needs to put up the stats, because essentially a Senior Bowl isn't just picking talent. They're picking talent based on the type of production that's going to draw crowds and get NFL interest. And NFL scouts and scouts will look at tape and go, they're pragmatic because they want to keep their jobs. So they look at guys and they go, what I heard was plus accuracy, plus pocket presence, tough, good kid. No one's going to have a bad word to say about him. Arm is not top half of the league for starters, but it is good enough to be a starter. Makes all the throws you'd want to make in an offense. He's just not Matt Stafford special as an arm talent. I would have given him a higher grade if he had more good tape. More good tape is code for I need production to substantiate giving him a high enough grade that my GM isn't going to come downstairs and go, and you've given me a grade for a guy who has no production that I can't cover my ass with when we draft him on the first or second day, because all the radio people that we say we don't listen to, but my owner overreacts to, is going to say, why would you draft this guy when Colin Cowherd said that he's a bum because he didn't have good stats,
Right.
And what does Colin Cowherd know other than how to talk and read the sports page? I mean, he's a talented guy in that way, and he knows a lot about sports in general, but he's a generalist. He's not a scout.
And so, he's also
controversial.
He likes, yes.
Yeah. He courts controversy for clicks. That's what they do. That's what the media has gotten to at this point is entertainment. It's sports entertainment.
Right.
So probably you're looking at Skyler Thompson as a late round pick,
like
who will have to
fifth round,
5th, 6th, 7th, maybe
that's
even
when
a UDFA.
right when that's when the what are the comp picks start coming in.
Yeah.
That sounds like a guy you'd want to take with an extra comp pick. Worth the risk.
That's very possible. So, but then again, Tony Romo, there are people who like Tony Romo, and he was a UDFA.
This guy.
There you go. There you go. Congrats to you.
Yeah.
So you look
Parcells, man.
Parcells. So that's the point, is that he may go anywhere from the 5th round to undrafted. And that means with draft capital, when you've invested all that money in a player that you think is safe because he has the things that have nothing to do with film and good enough film. When you have those two things together, that guy gets the looks. It's the same reason that Doug Marrone had to ask Shad Khan and his executive staff if he could allow James Robinson to compete in practice, because he was looking good in flashes, and we want to see what he's really got. But I need your permission, because if I'm giving a UDFA a lot of looks and not getting the other guys up to the game plan, I don't want to get in trouble from you guys. And they gave him permission to do that because they were ready to go move on from Leonard Fournette. But that's when you do that, that tells you right away that whole bias of draft capital is based on sunken costs, not purely on talent. And so, this guy, Skyler Thompson, as a fantasy player, deep league, practice squad. Otherwise, you're monitoring to see whether he starts to make some noise in the camp where they say, hey, he could make the roster.
Right.
And then, hey, this guy got hurt. We're going to have to roll with him and see what he's got. Oh, wait a minute. This guy looks pretty good. Mm-hmm. Those are the steps. And any step along those ways might not work out.
Right. And we got a guy. We had Cooper Rush taking snaps for us last year in Dallas. So, I mean, practice squad, there's once you get in there, it's once you find a coach who backs you up, and you got a little bit of tape out there from those games in the summer, I think you can kind of get rolling. You can get a little backing, and you get sturdy foundation, in the organization. So, all right, enough about quarterbacks. Let's move on to running backs. And I think the wide receiver class is the belle of the ball, but there are some running backs at the top. I want to hear about Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Isaiah Spiller. I want to hear about how you have them ranked and what your perception is for them going forward.
I have them in that order. There's not much separation between Hall and Walker. And if, to be honest with you, it's just about fit who you would pick one more over the other. I happen to think Hall just expresses has potential with his upside. His upside potential may be a little greater than Walker's, just because his burst is a little better. That's the real separating factor, is that his burst is slightly better than Walker's, and he has a little bit better expression than power. But Walker is a more overall refined player right now. And Hall is a little bit more of a guy that sometimes it looks a little too easy for him, as if it just comes naturally. And
kind of like former Iowa State running back David Montgomery, very smooth as well.
Yeah. I would say that the thing with Hall is that when you have, this is common with all players, and this is something that I think fantasy people need to remember, is that players don't get coached up in the NFL to technique, to concepts about their position. They get coached up the majority on game plan and scheme. And the coaches expect you to already be well-versed in your techniques. And if you aren't, they expect you to find ways to get better with that. Because when you go to practice, you're a coach, when you've gone to practice and you run people through drills, you're running them through maybe 5 to 6 drills in the span of 15 minutes. If you've ever practiced something that is a motor skill, whether it's music or memorize something that you've had to, recite on a stage, for one, that practicing and playing on a stage are two different things, which is why some players shine in practice but suck when the lights come on. And coaches talk about that, or scouts talk about that a lot. And number two, that 15 minutes is rarely going to get you where you need to be. You've got to put in hours of work every day, dedicated. Maybe it's maybe it's 15 minutes a day
right
on those things, every day in the off season, and probably more than
plan is
that.
always to continually keep that structure
Yeah.
15 minutes, but then you have things come in.
Yeah.
The game plan didn't look too good. We got to tighten something up, or the coach wants to make an adjustment to his scheme. Like, oh, this was the plan on Monday, but Wednesday we've decided to change the scheme. We got to cut into those 15 minutes. So it changed on the fly. It never works out how you plan it.
No, because remember, if any of your kids, anybody listening with kids, or you were a kid and played in band, okay, it's the analogy like that. You go to band practice, let's play some scales. They honk out some scales that are all out of tune, all out of rhythm, but you warmed up doing that, maybe did one other warm up, and then it was time to practice the music for the performance that you're doing. There's no work on different types of techniques, different types of exercises in depth. You're not playing your scales really slowly for 15 minutes alone to really get refined at the instrument on that level. And that's why some people who are more naturally talented rise up to a certain point where they're good in their class, but then when they're asked to, when it's time to actually do something at a higher level beyond just like school, they have to put in a lot of the work. So when you look at Breece Hall, usually great college players are great athletes who adapt quickly to things, but don't necessarily have to have the refined skills and concepts in a really efficient way. I think he has a lot of them, but with pass protection, with ball security, with catching the football, with certain chances he takes as a runner conceptually, he can get better. I think he'll still be good, but it's one of those things that if it comes too easy for him and he thinks he's made it early, and then defenses adjust to certain things and try and force him to do things that he's not comfortable with, and he doesn't work through them, he winds up in a situation where maybe he struggles more often because he hasn't figured out how to work through it. He never had to do that. Kenneth Walker is a guy you can tell he's comfortable maybe with he's comfortable with duo, zone, and gap running, whereas I think Hall is more comfortable with zone and gap.
Right.
So Walker's a good tight crease runner. He's very patient. He has the quickness you're looking for. That's almost as quick as Hall. Good, really strong acceleration. He can block. His assignment worthiness with complex assignments, with say more than one blitzer coming at a time, or delayed blitzes with them coming in layers, he gets tripped up on just like everybody else. But he gets good position in one-on-one situations. He can take on blitzing linebackers inside. He has some potential as an edge helper, that kind of thing. The pass catching, he can catch the ball. That's what you want to see. And he uses his hands well. He runs the routes he runs that he's asked to run. He runs well, just like Leonard Fournette, Melvin Gordon, other guys that I've looked at over with quality over quantity. Walker fits in that. Spiller's not fast. Big deal. He's quick enough. He has enough acceleration. Those things matter more.
The twitch stands out on film.
It does.
He's twitched up like 100. You watch his film and he's twitched up.
Yeah, and he's also there's an added twitchiness to him that comes when you are conceptually sound with understanding how to use your footwork, because your feet are actually the expression of what your eyes see as a running back or a quarterback, and even a wide receiver and tight end to an extent, but more so quarterbacks and running backs, because your eyes process what you're doing, and you're either running towards a hole or you're dropping back from the line. And when your timing is linked up with either your blockers or your receivers and to the pass protection. So your feet need to be precise with adjustments, whether it's penetration or blitzes, or whether it's anticipating where the block is going to spring an open hole, and that has to do with mentally understanding and having a good feel for the types of blocking scheme that you're running behind, whether you need to accelerate or change your pace, change your stride length, as well as dealing with unexpected consequences and getting back on track to be able to find an alternate solution or go back to the solution that was the plan. And if your feet are too wild, like say Kenyon Drake early in his career, if they're too wide, you're making too many big jump cuts, like Anthony McFarland or trying to do these types of things, you're creating too much space. And now it looks great in college because you usually don't have those issues. And so people go, look at how athletic he is. And
I
look at his combine times.
McFarland coming out of Maryland.
Yeah. And listen, that's fine. But when you look at McFarland, I remember watching him against Jacksonville and Jacksonville stuffing him on a play where if he had just been efficient doing things like Aaron Foster does, things that David Montgomery has learned to do, things that Frank Gore did, opening your hips with one step, and instead of jump cutting forward like Adrian Peterson, who was the exception to the rule, and even him was kind of boom bust sometimes with this maneuver. But when you jump cut forward and you literally jump 2 to 3 yards forward and into the backside of your blocker or into the defender to make a cut outside, that's not pressing and cutting. That's jumping unnecessarily and cutting. There's a difference. And, I've watched Kenyon Drake literally knock himself on his back by hitting his head up against the ass of a blocker at Miami multiple times. There was one on Monday night that was infamous. And when you look at McFarland, I remember him doing the, cutting and just getting stuffed. And I saw that play and I was watching on Sunday. I go, what would Frank Gore do? And so I went to the game that I had taped, and it was the Jets, I think, against the Chargers. And for very first play, I kid you not, that he literally had the same type of run, same similar situation, opened his hips, got 15 yards, like 36-year-old Frank Gore that fantasy people who have less than a 3-year memory just hate after in the past 3 years. But that's the thing. Isaiah Spiller, when you think fast and your feet are in sync with your eyes, you play quicker. And he's an expression of that. And he's strong enough. It's just a matter of little lapses he has with gap schemes that are not going to be a big deal because he's going to probably play in an outside zone. And he's going to probably do well in that. And that's why the NFL's higher on him than some fantasy people, because they understand the metrics and context. They also understand what he does with his feet and how he reads plays, and that the things that he has issues with are just lapses.
I see. For some reason, I envision Isaiah Spiller in Atlanta. I just see him in a Falcons uniform, Falcons jersey. So maybe we'll see that happen. But I think he's going to be a solid pro. Rashad White and Pierre Strong are two players that have picked up steam steadily over the last few months. Can you break these two guys down for us, please?
Sure. Starting with Rashad White, certainly can develop into a starter. Now, the issues with him are that, number one, he runs to open space rather than setting up leverage, in the same way that a quarterback waits for the route to break open rather than looking at the leverage to throw it with anticipation. And once you wait too long, the hole closes. And for the quarterback, with a running back, if you're not following your blocking scheme, the hole closes on you because you're not looking at the true thing that sets up open creases. He has that of an issue. He also has an issue where when he gets into an open crease and he starts to enter it and he sees a defensive back or linebacker waiting at the other side flat-footed, instead of saying, hey, this is my one-on-one, I'm expected to win this, whether with power or a move, he tries to bounce out of the hole after he's already halfway in it. I've seen that repeatedly with him. Now, you're going to see a lot of open, big hole runs. You're going to see him use some power. You're going to see some of that speed. He has terrific hands. He has good hand-eye coordination, very good receiver. So they see all that and go, ooh, scat back in a big body. Right. He's good. He can do it all. And there's some things that he has the potential
there was another Arizona State running back who was a scat back in a big body.
Yeah.
What the heck was his name?
Kaelin Bellage.
Yes.
And everyone liked him in the fantasy space too, for the same reasons.
Right.
And the same reason is that they see a 40 time and they get very excited about that. So I think Rashad White right now can be a situational contributor for a team. If he's forced to start, he can get yards for you. And as a fantasy player, it might not make a difference for you if he's getting yards right now. But long-term, what you're going to need to see development from him to get the tough yards, to get the yards that get him those 15 to 17 touches a game, as opposed to giving him 3 to 5. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I didn't mention this other player. Who do you have higher, Algier or White? I have Algier ahead of Rashad White. And there's somebody, Nino from Toilets to Titles. He has White ahead of Algier. So I want to hear, who do you have higher?
I have White ahead of Algier.
Okay.
And
fair.
Yeah,
So Nino
sure.
wins that one. Yeah.
Sure.
But we'll see, though. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But I Pierre Strong over both of them, all three of them.
Okay.
And Pierre Strong he has some things to work on when he makes cuts. His feet, he has some issues with his stance in and out of cuts where he falls down. That he's going to have to address with his footwork there. His blocking will have to get a little bit better. There are certain decisions he makes as a runner that can get a little bit better, but most everything that he's got going on, other than that cutting, are things that he can build on and get better with, as opposed to have to unknot his game and reknot it in the right way. The speed's great. I think he's a Raheem Mostert type of back.
Really?
In terms of, I think he can, in terms of potential, he can develop into somebody like that with the right fit. I think Miami would be a great fit for him.
Because Raheem Mostert, if not for the injuries,
he's a complete back.
Yeah. The injuries completely have derailed him, but when he's on the field, the guy excels. He's a solid player. Yeah,
if you get Pierre Strong in Miami, you use Mostert as the model for Strong to develop towards. You still have Sankey. You can have Strong on a slower development track, or have him as a reserve just in case, and you can give him a chance to develop and learn from a couple of guys.
You said Sankey, but you meant Gaskin, correct?
Gaskin, yes,
Washington,
exactly. Miles Gaskin. That's what I was thinking.
Washington running backs.
I was thinking of the guy I didn't like in Sankey. I guess you had me thinking of some of these other guys.
Bishop Sankey. Yeah, no, I remember him. But he was a Washington guy.
He was a Washington guy.
Yes.
But those are. I like him. Algier. Listen, I understand why people like the all-around play. He breaks tackles. He's
young
guy.
At the position.
He is young at the position.
Walk on.
He is a walk on. All those things are admirable. My issue with him is that I don't think he has a good feel for angles of pursuit, and that applies to both as a runner and a pass protector. I see him consistently missing the mark of when and how to time his acceleration as a runner, and where to be as a blocker, where he seems one step late on a regular basis with those things. And maybe he corrects that, but I think it's a hard thing to fix, because you look at Abram Smith, who I think is a little bit underrated out of Baylor as an example, who is a natural outside zone runner. He's a linebacker who, with two torn ACLs, doesn't have the bend that Algier has, that's for sure. But when you watch him run zone, he looks like a 10-year veteran running the outside zone.
And didn't he lead the team in tackles a year prior to being switched to running back? So the guy's he's produced.
Yeah, and so to me,
good Senior Bowl as well, correct?
He understands angles. The fact that he understands angles is the reason why he looks like a guy who's been playing outside zone for at least 5 or 6 years. Maybe did it at high school and then played it for 3 years, at Baylor, instead of what he actually did. So that to me is a hard to teach thing. It was hard for CJ Spiller. Was a great athlete, and not CJ Spiller, CJ Procise, and even CJ Spiller, great athletes. But when you ask them to run zone plays, they couldn't show the patience. They either over or underestimated angles of pursuit and struggled in that aspect of the scheme. So unless you put in Algier, and Algier isn't a fast runner.
Right.
So the fact that he's not an explosive guy, you're not going to run him in gap, where gap is really about hitting it hard, hitting it fast. That's why Leonard Fournette was so good in Jacksonville on gap, because he's basically an 18-wheeler with drag racer acceleration, who was going to run through people and you could get him downhill. Now ask him I used to compare it to like a toll booth. If the toll booth is just one open gate and you know where it is, you're an 18-wheeler. You may not have much handling, but you're going to ram through that thing. But if you're asked to make the quick turn 15 yards away from the toll booth plaza and pick one of, 8 gaps that are there, you might swerve and take out the whole plaza and not get anything and be wrecked. And that was Leonard Fournette in his own scheme because he just didn't have that movement skill. And, so when you look at Algier, he has the movement skill, doesn't have the speed. So he's got to be good in zone. And if he has issues with some of these things with more athletic defenders with angles, that's where I worry about him.
All right, let's move on to wide receiver. I don't want to keep you too long. And so this year, I think the general consensus, we know we got Jameson Williams, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks. So we know who the top guys are. But outside of that, George Pickens, Sky Moore, Christian Watson, who are some of the names you like? I mentioned Pickens, Moore, Watson, touch on them, but who are the guys you like outside of the big name wide receivers in this class?
Sure. There's enough guys, with Pickens probably being probably Pickens being on the lower end of that tier of guys that I think can contribute right away and maybe give you fantasy production in the right fit where like they can be Kenny Galladay in Detroit where he's protected by two outside receivers with great skills and he can have great matchups with his athletic ability.
Right.
Pickens reminds me of that. So does Treylon Burks, who reminds me of that. I know
Pickens with the number one and the way he high points the football. He reminds me of another great wide receiver who wore number one in college and then wore number 88 in the NFL. I see some of that in George Pickens.
I would say he makes very difficult catches. He also makes situations where he has to make very difficult catches, and that's what he needs to correct. If he can learn, because the high point thing is there for sure, but the thing that he does that Jamar Chase doesn't do, that some of the best receiver prospects don't do, is that he jumps late. And when he jumps late, he leans back. And when you're leaning back towards the defender like this on a consistent basis, they have access to all of this to be able to knock away. And while he has great hand-eye coordination to make some of these plays, when you don't jump early enough, and when you jump early, you get your back straight up and down. When you watch Jamar Chase last year, most of his jump back techniques on fades and these types of routes that they throw straight up and down. And it forces the defender to be farther away. And if he isn't farther away, he has to play through the back of the defender. And a lot of tall dudes like Pickens, sometimes they jump late and they make these plays, and they've got to get better with the timing. So some little things with his game. I still expect him to be a good player. I like Khalil Shakir.
Okay,
I think Khalil Shakir, he makes those types of catches. He makes difficult catches. He makes the potentially difficult catches easier than what he needs, than what Pickens might. He's quick. He's a Steelers type wide receiver, a guy who gets downhill quick. He's versatile. He can take contact. He knows how to run with the football and get yards for you in an efficient manner. He has some drops, but they're minor lapses that he can correct in the same way that Deontay Johnson did. Sky Moore, listen, good player. I think he's a little overrated as a runner after the catch and a little underrated as a player in contested situations. So the speed is appealing for him. I think again probably will become a good player. I think I
have him ahead of Dotson.
Yeah.
Where do you have those two?
I have Dotson ahead of him, but it's slow. They're in the same tier. Okay. And to me, the tier is more important. I have 1 8th, 1 11th. I have Moore 11th. I have Jahan Dotson 8th. Dotson to me is a better route runner. I think he has more versatility in terms of what he can do for you. Okay. And because we're not scouting for a specific team, I'm having to be more open to all the possibilities, what a player can do, and to the depth of skill that they can do it. And as a result, Dotson grades a little higher. Whereas with Moore, if you're going to tell me that he's going to be on a specific team that values what Moore does well, which is run after the catch, maybe you can allow him to work a little bit more from the slot and have contested catches from the slot, then Sky Moore might be my pick over Jahan Dotson, who might get disqualified from that. I like Watson and Pierce. I like those guys more than anybody we've just mentioned.
Really?
Yes, I do. I
like Watson, so I'm listening. I'm all ears right now.
Watson has some things to work on, but again, he played in a West Coast offense. He's used to having to make reads with quarterbacks that a lot of these guys aren't, even at a higher level, because they played in a spread offense that wasn't as complex as a West Coast offense.
I think Watson, if I'm Green Bay and I'm looking to replace Valdez-Scantling, I'm taking Christian Watson, and that's an upgrade. I'm not saying it's not Devontae Adams, but you got to replace Valdez-Scantling, and I think this dude would fit right in.
I think if they were able to take Chris Olave and Christian Watson, Aaron Rodgers might want to play a little longer than what he's even planning to play with. But Watson to me reminds me of Javon Walker if he can gain another 8 to 12 pounds. Or you could say that the other player that might compare for people who remember is a little more recently is Martavis Bryant, when Martavis Bryant was good and what was going on between the ears wasn't hampering him in terms of his development.
He was very good.
Yeah. So Watson has the ability to add weight. Pierce, to me, listen, there's not much difference physically between him and Justin Jefferson. There's not much difference between him and Justin Jefferson going up to win a football. The difference is that Alex Pierce jumps 3.5 inches higher than Justin Jefferson does. There's not much difference between Alec Pierce and Justin Jefferson as blockers, though I would say Jefferson's a little better of a blocker, but you can put Pierce in the slot or as an H-back and have him help block linebackers and safeties. And that's very important, not because of the run game, but for fantasy listening people, it's important because when you're a believable blocker at wide receiver who can take on those guys, you can run play action looks where they think they're getting a slight push of a matchup advantage against them as a blocker. So, and then he basically escapes them for a wide open route up the middle and has a one-on-one with a safety that he's going to pull that ball down a fair bit. He's not as good of a route runner as Justin Jefferson, but he's not bad. I think he has a chance to become a perennial 900 to 1,200 yard receiver in this league. I think he's a very good player. Those are guys. And the last guy I'll mention, I'd love to mention David Bell, but I think he has a chance to be a Jarvis Landry, Anquan Bolden type of player. I've been talking about that. I'm scared
of him because of Kelvin Harmon. I loved Kelvin Harmon, so I'm afraid of David Bell.
I agree with that, except I just think that Bell's a better route runner and can play more inside. So I think there's a little more versatility to him. But the guy that I like the most out of everyone I've mentioned is my number 5 player, Justin Ross. I think that the risk with Justin Ross is palpable, and this is why I do a pre-draft and post-draft with my publication. I'm just rating the field, and what I looked on the field is I saw a guy who handles physical coverage very well. He's not at all swayed by hand fighting. He's completely oblivious to that. He can use one hand and ward off an Alabama defender and be able to make catches with guys all over him. And his hands technique is peerless. Fantastic hands technique to make catches, takes hits, deals with that, shrugs off physical play. The thing with him is, the injury, the neck injury, which no one's ever come back from. Well, he was cleared to play last year. And the doctor said, as we saw in recent big media articles, that doctor said, listen, he has no more of a chance of having a catastrophic injury than any other football player who steps on the field. That's how well he's healed. So then people go, well, the injury is why I think he was better pre-injury. Yeah, this is just like Nick Chubb. Because Nick Chubb had a surgery on 3 ligaments, had them stitched together in a way that had to be exact. And people were saying he just doesn't look as good. Now, I watched so much tape of that guy because I wanted to be sure. He didn't look any different to me. He didn't at all. When I looked Ross, there were some minor differences. The minor differences is that he didn't quite look as explosive in and out of breaks with some of his movement off a press with his footwork. And after the catch when he was trying to make a move on somebody in the open field. And we came to find out that he played on a Jones fracture since the first half of the Georgia game, the first game of the year, played all through it, having to get shot up on Toradol, which wears off pretty much by the early third quarter, if not halftime. And he played on that all year and then had to get surgery, had to be immobilized for 6 to 8 weeks. And that's if you just broke it once. Right. And maybe not had played on it for how many weeks he played on. He probably further screwed it up. And then you're immobilized. And instead of being, say, Garrett Wilson, who started from a surplus of athletic ability and didn't have to remake his body after the spinal surgery. It's only go into a season where you break your foot and have to play on it. He came in relatively fresh, maybe some aches and pains, maybe some muscle stuff, but then could just get to training for 12 weeks to go to the combine and game the system that the combine things are, just like you get 18 weeks of SAT prep. So let's imagine Justin Ross, if this was the SAT, instead what happened to him is that maybe he was in a coma, or he was like in a, or maybe in a, in a state where he had a head injury and he had to start from a deficit and only had 6 weeks to get ready. And the fact that he ran a 4.56 40 and jumped 31 inches after a year, he had to remake his body. And then another year where he played on a bad foot and had to be immobilized for half the time that he had to prepare for the combine. As I talked to a specialist in biomechanics who has a scouting background, they said to me, I said, does this fly? Am I crazy to think that when he gets into a camp that he'll be closer to healed and they'll go, wow, we got a bargain? And he said, I'm just shocked that Justin Ross ran a 4.56 40 and jumped 31 and a half inches, because there's no way that he was fully healed or remotely healed from that surgery in just, the amount of time that that it took between the end of the season and there. So when you look at that, I want a tough guy. I want a guy who's not fazed by coverage. I want a player who dominated top competition when he had Trevor Lawrence. And I want a guy. Yeah. And I want a guy who basically, when I look at that 4.56 40 and a 31.5 inch vertical leap, I'm going to subtract a tenth of a second off that 40 time, probably. I mean, I'm not scientifically, but I'm just talking.
Oh, if you were the scout trying to draft him, yeah, for sure.
I would, but I would say if I would say I'm gonna say he's probably 4.46, and I'm gonna probably say he's at least 34, 35 inches, as the vertical leap. And even if he's not, he reminds me of Hakeem Nicks at worst. Ooh. And if you
another great player,
you take Hakeem Nicks, who wasn't all that fast, but great hands, and you could bang on him all day, and he just would look at you and go, while he was making the catch, in his prime. And to me, Justin Ross can play inside, outside like that. He at worst, he's a Hakeem Nicks type of player. At best, maybe he's not AJ Green, but maybe he's a little closer to that than people think.
All right, I want to touch on one more player, and then they'll wrap this thing up. A guy that I really like, kind of a sleeper. You mentioned a guy that you think is a Steelers type player. I thought you might have been mentioning this guy. It's Danny Gray out of SMU. I see a lot of Deontay Johnson in his game, and I know I'm going to have him on a lot of my Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. What are your thoughts on Danny Gray?
Danny Gray shows a lot of potential as a tracker of the football. That's one of the things I noticed, is that vertically he does a really good job of vertically tracking the football against tight coverage. He can make the late adjustment to be able to track the ball with his back to the quarterback. And that's a tough thing to teach. You've got to be able to do that pretty much when you enter the NFL, or you're very rarely going to ever develop it. I don't think I've ever seen a player who has developed it from that standpoint. Now, in terms of the rest of his game, to me, I think that there's some lapses with routes against zone coverage. He makes himself available too early without understanding that the coverage is favorable, and gets his quarterback into trouble, leading to interceptions. I think if he expands the skills of his game outside of the baseline footwork, agility, hand usage at the catch point, these are things that need some work. I think he can make a depth chart. I think he could potentially earn a role as a fourth or fifth option, in the short term. And then I think if he can continue to grow from there, maybe you're going to get something that you get something out of him where he can become a contributor.
I like that. And if you play DFS in the preseason, he's a guy who, if he's the fourth or fifth wide receiver, he's going to be seeing a lot of reps in the preseason. He could take like any ball at any moment. He's got the speed to take it to the house. So that's a DFS plug for August football. All right. So if you're looking something early, Danny Gray, start him in your DFS lineups. All right, Matt, man, we touched on so much. Well, you touched on so much this evening, and we're always blessed to have you on. I appreciate we've had you on now last year, I think the year prior, talking about these guys. And I think after the NFL draft, I'd love to get you on possibly to talk about some of these landing spots. And again, I want to let everybody know, Go check out Matt Waldman, RSP.com, the rookie scouting portfolio. What's the YouTube channel? Is it just Matt Waldman RSP?
Matt Waldman's RSP Film Room.
Yeah, because I'm subscribed to that as well. And I know that Kansas State quarterback, I think that was your last video, correct? Skyler Thompson?
Pretty recently, yeah.
All right, so you go check out all that stuff. And Rich, who's in here with me as well, at Frito Bandito _FF. And if I didn't mention Matt's handle on Twitter, it's at Matt Waldman. I am on the Twitter at Coach Sheps. Go check out toiletsandtitles.com. And then, Matt, if you have anything else you'd like to plug, any other shows you've been on recently or anything, go ahead. This is your time.
Well, I appreciate that. Obviously I have the RSP Cast, which is a podcast that I do regularly. I have guests like Russ Orlandi, who is a former NFL scout and current head of U.S. Scouting for the Montreal Alouettes, who we've done some shows. We're probably going to do some more again. Mark Schofield, who's fantastic with a lot of the quarterback analysis that he does. We often do weekly stuff. I'll have some things coming up from there. The RSP, just as a note, if you're interested in buying it, it's $21.95. It's available. You get a pre-draft and a post-draft and a newsletter. You get a ton of information that's actionable for fantasy. It's one of the most purchased draft guides. It's an independent scouting resource for cross-checking for NFL people, according to guys like Alex Brown, who is the SMU's recruiting director and meets with these guys regularly, says that the RSP and Dane Brugler's The Beast are two of those things that he sees purchased most often and in the hands of scouts and personnel people that come through that he has to meet with weekly and host. So you get that, and know that when you purchase, I donate up to $5,000 every year to Darkness to Light, an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children, as well as through training programs to adults and different organizations, so that they can spot potential grooming of kids, so that they can head that behavior off at the pass, as well as being able to know how to understand how to deal with a victim when they report it, so that they don't compound the trauma, which is often as big of an issue as the actual act itself. And the RSP has raised over $50,000 in the past 10 years. To Darkness to Light doing that. So, and we're going to be able to give them another $5,000 this year. Thanks to my subscribers again. So I appreciate you guys with that. And, you can find out more at mattwaldmanrsp.com.
Awesome, Matt, man, you crushed it. You knocked out of the park. This was a great episode. The NFL draft is almost a week away. We're very, very close. So we're going to finally get to see where some of these players land. It's been a lot of fun, Matt. Again, thanks for coming on. Rich, thanks for joining me this evening. And everybody at home, we appreciate you. Take care. We will see you all next week.